Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to a fresh story. We are so excited. This season, we are diving into families of all different sizes and styles and combinations because we're fascinated. We come from a family that is blended in so many ways, and we're just really excited to, learn from different people about what makes a family. And so today we have a very special guest to us. I've been working with Trystan in some capacity for a long time. I learned about you originally from The Longest Shortest Time. And then I was doing marketing for MITS, which was the first gender neutral clothing company. And we were
For
looking
kids.
for influencers for kids. Yeah. And I said, I have the perfect family for this. And so, we just got to be friendly on the internet. And when we were planning this season, you were, I think, the first person we wrote down on our list. We were like, we have to talk to Trystan. So that being said, without further ado, Trystan, who are you?
Oh, why do you have to start like that? That's a big
Casual
question.
Casual question. Who are you, Trystan?
Who am I?
Yeah.
I'm Trystan Reese. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a dad to 3 kids. I'm a transgender man, and I am a small business owner trying to make my way in this new era of anti-Trump politics.
Yes, very much. Okay, so let's just jump into it, Trystan. How did you create your family?
My partner and I had been dating for a year when we essentially got a phone call from a social worker that we had, been a little bit in connection with or in contact with. And she let us know that my partner's sister was going to have her kids, unfortunately, removed from her home the following week. And if we were available and interested in giving them a safe place, at least temporarily, then that would be the best option for keeping them in the family and together. Otherwise, they were likely going to be separated from each other and then likely adopted out into different families and would lose all connection with their biological family. And so we very quickly, I think literally in a matter of hours, had to decide whether we would be interested in driving up 2 hours to pick them up and being their at least temporary safe space. And possibly that might extend on into the future. And it has now been, 13 years. And these kids have never left.
How old were
they and how old were you? Was my other question.
So they were 1 and 3. So they were both toddlers. And we were 24 and 26, 25 and 27, which in straight years is like 15 years old. It's so young. And again, we'd been together for 1 year.
Wow.
1 year. Were you living together at the time?
We had just moved in together. Our goal had been to make it to a year of dating before moving in. We really wanted to pace things out, to take things slowly. This is still pre-gay marriage. And so in, queer communities and LGBTQ plus communities, I think there's been this thread of a desire to show and to prove our commitments and the strength of our partnerships in some ways that are, that's a really positive thing, that we, want to be connected to each other. We want to be committed to each other. In some ways, though, I think, when we don't have more formal ways, we kind of create our own informal ways, which can be great.
Yeah.
And also is moving in together too soon, that could be a death knell for a relationship. So we had committed, let's get to a year. We had just made it to a year. We had just moved in together. And then our 1-bedroom apartment became a home for 4 people.
Well, I have a question. I'm so curious about that time frame when you were deciding what was going to happen. Like, did you call your parents? Did you call your siblings? Like, who did you, or did you just hunker down together and talk about this for 3 hours? Like, what was that like?
I mean, we hunkered down together to talk about it. And I was an immediate yes, just because I was raised in a family where we've always had like a random cacophony of kids coming and going. Before I was even born, my parents had a babysitter for my big sister who fell on hard times with her family and just like moved in with my parents. So even before I was born, and then throughout all of my childhood, you know, if I had a gay friend in high school whose parents kicked him out of the house, he could come and stay with us. That's just always how we've been. And then after I moved out, my mom ended up being a formal foster parent for a woman who's, you know, now grown and who I think of as my sister, and we have a great relationship. It's just kind of how I was raised. When kids need you, you show up. And so I was an immediate yes. And it was actually my partner who was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I don't think you really understand how challenging this could be. They had spent many years, you know, setting good, healthy boundaries around how they could show up for their family and how they needed to show up for themselves. And so that, you know, it was very complicated, but ultimately my partner said, listen, we can do this. And this is the commitment you're making, is we're not taking these kids from an unstable situation to another unstable situation. You're going to stick it out with me for as long as they are with us. And that's the commitment I made. And I had to remind myself of that commitment yesterday. And it's been many years. So
I love that.
13 years is a long relationship, marriage, like, and 14 years, right? So you guys have had the kids for 13 years. You've been together for 14 years. That's long. That's longer than most marriages last. And like, I mean, kudos to you guys. The recommitment, I think, is very important.
It's really important, as is, I mean, what I've found, and I don't do well with this. So if my partner could overhear me, I know there would be laughter. But it is allowing things to change and evolve. You know, and I think I spent a lot of years really mourning that first year that we had together, where things were so fun and exciting and new. And it was, in many ways, it was my first time really being loved. And it's not that nobody loved me before, but it's that kind of love that isn't predicated upon any one thing or me pretending to be a certain way, but the sort of all-encompassing, no, the whole package, though. And I spent a lot of years being like, well, how could I have that back, please? That was great.
Which in a way is kind of like traditional, right? Like I see, like, in a way, like it's like, you know, a lot of like, you know, heteronormative families also have that problem, right? Where it's like they have the baby and then they're like, I miss our honeymoon stage, right? So in a way that was like very normal. So where was it that you guys finally were like, oh no, this is it. Like, we're never giving these kids back. We have to adopt them.
Honestly, it was like absolutely, you know, it was gradual. It was gradual. And so, you know, initially when they came to live with us and we realized, you know, since it was an informal arrangement at first, we couldn't put them in preschool. We couldn't take them to the doctor. So it was like, oh, shoot, if they got sick, we wouldn't be able to care for them. And so there was an emergency guardianship hearing and then a permanent guardianship hearing. So that was kind of the first step. But all along the way, we knew that what's best for kids, what's best for families is reunification. And so we were working really hard to figure out how could we get their first family the support that they need to take the kids back, you know, and certainly we didn't want to become parents at the expense of someone else losing their kids. You know, this is why I think for queer families, it's so incredibly beyond insulting, beyond condescending, beyond whatever that is. Will say, oh, well, why did you need to have a biological kid? Why don't you just adopt, quote unquote, when it's like that word just is doing so much work in that sentence, because nothing about adoption is just anything. You know, that's just not how we would have chosen to form a family and to become parents. But just slowly over time, it became clear that it just wasn't going to be an option for them to go back there. It just wasn't going to be safe. And so it was truly many years before we were like, okay, at some point we need to pursue legal adoption to give them that solid foundation that they really deserve to be able to keep moving forward with their lives. And so it really wasn't until I think maybe 5 or 6 years that we were able to do a final adoption with them.
Jenny, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say the nature of foster care is so sort of flipped on its head, where they're willing to give money to the foster parents, but not to the birth parents in order to help them get into a better situation. Like, I think that, you know, there needs to be sort of a reckoning around the whole thing. Like you said, the just adopt, it's much more complicated than I think people understand.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's complicated and it's deeply traumatic, I think, for everyone as well. And that trauma needs to be attended to.
What
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what is it like to you're 24, 25 years old. One day you're eating eggs Benedict with your partner and watching TV, and the next day you have two toddlers in the house, you're changing diapers and wiping noses. What is that like to go from I mean, that's a huge fresh start right there.
Yeah, it was awful. I mean, I had definitely underestimated the amount of work that it would be, how hard it would be. Uh, I mean, yeah, I in my mind it was like, ooh, fun. And then what actually happened was like, oh no, this is not much fun. It was so little like cuddling and reading children's books, and it was so much dealing with like a horrible diaper rash that had never been treated and was now a really brutal infection. It
Right.
was so much, holding a kid in bed at like 3 a.m. while he had night terrors. It was just so much, teaching them that they were safe and it was okay to say no. And it was just so much really, really basic and harrowing stuff. And so little, sticky hands and pillow fights, or I don't know what silly thing I was imagining, but it was not that. I'll tell you that much
and
right now.
Raffi. There was not a lot of Raffi songs. Yeah.
No. And I remember there was one night, just maybe 2 weeks in, where I just put the kids to sleep, put them to bed. Putting them to sleep sounds like I took them to the vet. I put them to bed. I got down in bed and I just cried. And I was like, is it too late to send them back? And of course, my partner was like, yeah, fool, it's too late. I told you this was going to be hard.
Yeah.
You live in a fantasy world. It is hard. And here we are. It's too late,
Yeah.
So yeah, it was incredibly difficult, and our community just rallied around us so hard. We could not have done it without them.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too. Jenny, what were you going to say?
I don't remember.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So tell us about the community.
Important.
Like, so you obviously were close to your parents because they seem like great people who took in every single person that needed help. So did they show up for these kids?
100%. I think my parents flew down. My sister flew down from Oregon, I think 1 week in, to stay with us and just like help and teach us. My parents both flew down, and, just again, because I don't come from a family where biology dictates family. So to them, it was like, oh, grandkids. And even if it had been temporary, even if it had been, these are our temporary grandkids, that would have been fine too. Just absolutely surrounding them with as much love and support as possible and helping us pick up and clean up and eat and feed the kids and take care of ourselves and all the things. So yeah, just incredibly lucky.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, clearly it worked out because then years later you decided to have your own child. So tell us about the journey to deciding about Leo.
Yeah, I mean, we were at this point probably 5 years into the parenting journey. The adoption was on the horizon. It did seem like things were settling down, and as a transgender man who's been in the transgender movement for, upwards of 20 years, I think 23 years at this point, I've always known transgender men who've given birth to children themselves, who've had biological children. So I know that for many people, perhaps the average person, it's not something that you're too familiar with. But in my community, it's not uncommon for sure.
Right.
And then definitely getting more common all the time as people start to get more exposure to different ways of being a transgender man.
You started a lot of that conversation.
You did.
Too.
You.
I carried it forward.
I
carried it
did.
forward.
I wonder how it felt though, knowing that there were all these people that had come before you, and you're like, it's not that big of a deal, because it was you were really. I think you carried it forward. You really became a face of that. And I don't think that maybe that's what you wanted. And I don't think that I have to imagine it wasn't always comfortable, and it was probably very rarely easy. And there was probably a lot, I know that I read comments. There were a lot of people that had a lot of things to say, but I do think that it must've been very bizarre for you to be like, it's not that, like, I remember being like, guys, like, it's not that, like, in my mind, I was like, if people can do it, they've been doing it, right? Like, that's how I think. Like, if the biology allows for it, like, of course people have been doing this. If I don't know people that do it, that doesn't mean that it's not done. Right. And so for you, I wonder how that felt to be like, there's like a whole line of people behind me holding their babies that already did this. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize. There's a reason that I said, like, I'm not responsible, I'm not a pioneer, but I did
Yeah.
carry the story forward, because that's something I was really clear when I chose to have a baby myself as a transgender man with my partner. And when I chose to tell my story publicly, that's something that I insisted from every journalist I chose to work with was, you cannot say that I am the first. You cannot say that I am the only. For at least 20 years, transgender men have been having babies,
Yeah.
and I'm good friends with the first trans man that we were aware of ever who had a baby. And his son, I think,
That's
will
cool.
be 23 or 24 this year. And so, there are these waves of, oh my gosh, trans men can have babies. Okay, welcome to the party, but it's been
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things that I said when I worked with any journalist, please do not say that I am a pioneer. I am not. I am definitely standing on the shoulders. And those guys are still alive. It's not like
Yeah.
they've
They're
become,
still raising their kids.
they're
Like-
still raising their kids. Absolutely.
So,
So I did decide to tell my story publicly to try and help shape a narrative around what it means to be trans, to just try to build a little bit of nuance in there, because the types of stories that I see on the news are not really representative of what I see happening in community. And so my hope was that we could become a story about, a family who found a way, to your point, Jenny, to, create some containers for all the love that they want to put in the world and to build our own little empire of love in our family.
I love that.
And I was hoping that people would be excited about that. And some were, but also some weren't. And
A
that
lot
was,
were.
Yeah.
that was hard.
And this was, how old is Leo now?
He's
like
7.
8? 7,
Yeah.
okay.
Almost 7 3/4. He's going to yell
crazy.
at me from downstairs.
He would want you to clarify that. So when I said 8, I was really doing him a favor.
Yeah.
So this was nearly a decade ago that you were having this conversation, and we forget how different things were nearly a decade ago. And for better and for worse.
Yes and no. Like
Yeah.
I can literally remember being pregnant with Leo on the night when it was very clear that America was about to elect our first woman president. And, that was Hillary Clinton. I mean, and then it was Trump. And so in some ways it's changed, but also it hasn't, because we had the same shocking wake up call just 4 months ago. So yeah, it's changed, but also not, the way that change happens for trans people is quite incremental. And there's obviously lots of waves, the pendulum swings one way, it swings another way. We're kind of used to that, especially those of us who are of a certain age.
And who are activists, right, too? Like when you're keyed into it too, you're a little even more aware.
So did you always want to have biological children?
Oh goodness, no. No, that was not something I ever wanted to do. I always wanted to be footloose and fancy free. I did never imagine even getting married, and it really wasn't until I hit a certain age and I'd been working, on the front lines of the gay rights movement for years. And I was working on the campaign to save marriage equality in California. I think during that campaign in particular in 2008, I just started to hit that point where I thought, I think that life might be a lot more fun with another person around, that it might be a little easier to deal with some of the ups and downs if I had an anchor, a rock, someone to come home to, someone who was excited to see me and was happy that I was there and noticed that I was gone. And that's really when I started sort of, calling in the idea of a partner. But it wasn't until 2010, I think, that I actually met the person that I would later go on to marry. But yeah, I did not want a partner, did not want kids, did not want a house, none of those things. No.
How did you two meet?
We met at a brunch.
Okay.
Like we had mutual friends and met through them, just went to their house, separately invited, obviously. And I was very convinced pretty much immediately that was the person that I was going to marry. But it, took him a little while to come around.
I love that.
Okay,
And
I'm
when
patient.
You are patient. When did you guys tie the knot?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what year that was. Maybe 2015.
The kids were around, yeah.
The kids were around, yes, but marriage wasn't legal. And so, frequently, obviously this is a stereotype, but it's based on some fact that straight people celebrate wedding anniversaries and then queer people celebrate like our first date or when we first met, because we haven't had the option to legally marry, many of us, you know, since we've been in relationships. And so we pretty much only celebrate, you know, when our first dates, which I think was April of 2010.
I love that. Yeah.
Anniversary time.
Yeah.
That's right.
Anniversary
coming up.
So what was the reaction from the older kids when you told them that you were going to have a new baby in the family?
They were definitely had mixed reactions. So definitely our daughter was really excited about the idea of like someone that she could boss around / be a good leader to, you know, dress up and play with and teach things. And that has borne out, by the way, in the last 7 years. Like, they have spent a lot of time doing dress up and hair things and playing the game that she wants to play, whatever it is.
Yep.
That's like still happening today.
Big
and then our
sister shit,
eldest, big sister stuff. That's right. And then our eldest, you know, he was a little apprehensive, and I think, you know, he was concerned about what was his role in this new sort of family configuration going to be, and would it be any fun, and where would the baby sleep, and just some more practical things. I think with an undercurrent of, would we love the new baby more than we love him, because he comes from us. You know, the new baby would come from us, and you know, he was adopted. And so I definitely spent a lot of time supporting him through those big feelings throughout my pregnancy and into today.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is true for a lot of families, right? There's always, especially blended families or families like, what have you seen I'm curious about your answer to this, some of the challenges as you created this family, whether it was from the outside world in or from just regular family challenges? Like, what were some of the stumbling blocks you guys had to work through together?
Yeah. I mean, we've had a lot of stumbling blocks, as has any family, I assume. You know, I only have insight into mine and then the one I grew up in. I think some stumbling blocks are our eldest, you know, has some really, really unique intellectual, behavioral, emotional challenges, having, you know, been raised in a traumatic situation, being born into a traumatic situation. And then some of it just might be hardwired in there as well, you know, and so I think trying to wrangle the systems to see our family and to give us the support that we need and that he deserves has been, I mean, it's a challenge every single day. And he is 17 years old, you know, getting the school to just do his IEP, which they are legally required to do, but don't have the resources for, you know, not their fault. They can't do it. We need it, you know? And so there's this constant clash. You know, getting people to take us seriously and to believe us when we say that he has these challenges and he needs these kinds of supports. That's been a big stumbling block. And right now, you know, I'm a facilitator, a trainer. I specifically train on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion around trans stuff, around LGBTQ plus stuff, around neurodiversity, around communication and conflict, intercultural. Basically, everything I do has been made functionally illegal by the Trump administration. And so finances continue to be a huge challenge for our family, particularly being a trans person, just trying to work. I'm not even, you know, even my non-trans areas of expertise are now called into question just because I happen to be a trans person doing them. So that's been a big challenge as well.
Yeah, totally. I can see that as a challenge. And I think any parent listening to this with a kid that has an IEP or behavior stuff is going to relate and go, like, I totally understand what it's like to fight.
And it's only going to get worse. I mean, not to be a bummer, but like with the DOE and everything like that, like it's so disappointing what we are doing, what has been done to our country.
Yeah.
Sad.
I do a lot of coaching and I tell people, you know, it's really hard right now. It's probably going to get harder. And just be as clear-eyed as possible. And also to remember that, you know, we can do hard things. And, you know, my ancestors certainly survived worse than this. And it's not a contest, you know, I'm not trying to compare. It's just my community has been through incredibly difficult times and we're still here. And so I try to just sort of draw from their strength and wisdom and keep moving forward.
And raising children, right, who are open-minded and curious and
empathetic
humans, right, and activists. Raising like that's, you know,
mostly.
Mostly, yeah. So on that note, what have been some of the unexpected joys of becoming a father these last 13 years?
So many. You know, I hope my daughter's not listening, but she's 14 now, and she had a really rough day the other day, and she texted me to ask if we could do a daddy date, which we've been doing since she was little, which is just the two of us, out to eat. And,
Mm-hmm.
and she said, I really like a daddy date. I'm embarrassed to say this, but you're my best friend. And so those moments of tenderness, which are few and far between with a teenager, but those little glimmers of connection, even while they're, what is it, disambiguating, even while they're creating their own sense of self, even while they're figuring out who they are without being tethered to us as much. Those moments where I'm like, oh, all those years of putting in the work are really paying off now. Because when things are hard, when she makes a mistake, when she's hurt, hopefully she knows that she can come to me and I will hear her out, and I'll try to be level-headed and not come down, and be too reactionary. So that's definitely fun. And then we went to a huge anti-Trump protest over the weekend because my 7-year-old wanted to go. He saw the flyer outside that coffee shop we always go to before school, and he's like, well, I want to do that. Okay, of course you can. Let's do it. So those kinds of moments as well.
Your little activist. Yeah, I love that. I know I get this feeling. My son is almost 12, and so I get this feeling a lot. I'm curious if you do, where you're like, look at your kids and you're like, who the fuck let me be a parent? Like, right?
All the time. All the time. Yes, absolutely. We're even at the rally, it's like blazing sun, even in Portland, even in the spring, it's like, 80 degrees. I forgot sunblock for him. He is wearing a hat.
Fair.
That was the only hat I had, which is a grown-up hat that says gay is okay on it. We're like standing out for 2 hours in the sun before the rally starts. I'm like, oh no, who let me do this? Who put me in charge of human beings? I had to find a mom, to be like, can I use your sunblock? And, and to be that weirdo, but, here we are. And then it just reminds me that my parents also were probably just making it up, even though it felt as a kid, like they knew what they were doing. They didn't know what they were doing.
No. I just said that to my mom the other day because I'm just 40 and my parents had me pretty young. So my mom was like 44 when I went to college, 43. And I was like, I'm 40. I'm like, you were 43 and had an 18-year-old going to college? I was like, I don't understand. How did you know what to do? Like filling out college applications with me. It feels very scary. What do you wish the world knew about families that are created in a maybe other than normative way?
Yeah. I think, it's important that people understand that there are both powerful similarities and really meaningful differences. There are so many ways in which everyone has ended up in the blazing sun at some event somewhere and been like, oh, shoot, my kid's going to get sunburned because I didn't plan ahead. Like all of those things. Or if your kid's on an IP, great, mine too. Yep. Are you struggling? Great, us too. Like there's so many things that connect us. And also, there are additional challenges, unique challenges that a family like ours has to navigate. Homophobia absolutely does impact the kind of services that people think that our kid needs. They absolutely look at us and they discount a lot of what we have to say because they have a certain stereotype about what a two-dad family might be like and might want and might need. And we know that they write us off a lot because of that. And we have to fight twice as hard because we're not always believed. Like that's absolutely true. We weren't able to get married legally for many years into our family formation. And we had to do all these extra things to prove to the courts and the judge and blah, 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 that we were a stable, secure household. There are unique challenges and both of those things can be true at the same time. And to be, to really lean into and embrace and accept both. And to not be afraid to check in like, hey, this is a really tough time for trans folks right now being targeted in the way that you are. How are you all doing? What do you need? And not being afraid to name it and not being afraid to extend a hand and reach out. I think people are a little too precious right now. And they're like, well, is that performative? And I'm like, oh my gosh, do we need people performing? Oh, please perform. We really need it.
Great advice.
And it's all like performative is led by motivation and intention, right? Like, so if you really do mean it, it's not performative. It just is. But I imagine this is all so much of the work that you do too, because it's like inclusion and equity of saying like, yeah, we're the same, but also we need to talk about the differences. We can't just pretend that they're not there. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can we support you? Where's your work? How can people follow you and learn everything you're doing? Work with you? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. How can they? I've basically stepped back from social media because unfortunately it just isn't a place that where I can avoid my family being targeted, and that's not fair to do to my kids, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm barely on social media anymore, but I do all my training facilitation work through my consulting firm, which is called Collaborate Consulting. And, you know, you can put that in the show notes. And then I do have a book about my parenting journey called How We Do Family. And people can get that in all the places.
Yeah, we're going to link that. It's a great book. Yeah. And I mean, I'm listening to you and I'm like, I want you to coach me on being a parent. You're like, you're the parent or a parent. Then it's like, you know, and I think it's a combination of the work that you do naturally and who you are naturally, of just being so empathetic and taking the time to listen to what your children need. And I don't know, it's beautiful. And it's funny because you started out the podcast episode saying that you have a hard time with evolution and change and growth. And that's all you've been doing for the last 13 years.
Yeah, I think it's, particularly with the, you know, the changing of relationships and marriage stuff. It's just, I sort of over glorify the early days and miss being loved in that way, you know?
Yeah.
But yes, adaptation, I would say, is definitely my superpower. And I'm really having to dive deep into that skill now. That this population I'm a part of, you know, 0.01% of the population is now the number one most targeted culturally, politically, and legally right now. It's really, really, really bizarre and strange. You know, we're we're like this tiny sliver that is being vilified, and it's made my work really hard. And so happy to talk about that anytime, any place.
Yeah, and it's like you're literally, like you said, you're just trying to keep your kid from getting sunburnt, right? You're like, I'm just another dad out here, folks. Like, you know, I'm not anything special. But we appreciate your honesty and authenticity. Please go buy Trystan's book. Go give him a follow. All the places that you can. Thank you for being you and for being the person that is having these conversations, because it is these conversations that is going to change the cultural narrative and how, you know, how people like me have conversations with my kids about trans men and families. And I just, you know, appreciate you always being that person who, you know, is not afraid to put your head above the parapet and speak openly about this stuff.
Yeah, happy to do it. It's my honor.
Thank you.